Hello and welcome to the recorded version of the So Much More Than an Athlete workshop. Unfortunately, I had some technical issues when I ran this workshop as part of the 2021 Athlete Development Project a few weeks ago. Since it's such an important topic, I decided therefore to do a recording and make it available to a much wider audience. Before we get started, you might want to grab a pen and some paper, because there might be a few things that you want to jot down as we go along. And also I've got a couple of tasks prepared for you to do within the workshop. If we were doing this workshop live, I'd get you to introduce yourself in the chat, let us know who you are and tell us something about you. Because we're not doing it live, I'm just going to ask you to do that on the paper that you've got. And I'd like you to just say one or two things about you that are not sports related. Obviously, this is not for sharing in the circumstances, but to get you thinking about what this workshop is all about. So just a couple of things, not sports related. They don't need to be novel or amazing in any way. They don't even need to be all that interesting. Just a couple of things about you that are not sports related. Central to this workshop are two interrelated topics. The first one is identity and the importance of having an identity that isn't solely related to your achievements in sport and you being a sports person, or being a parent, or the job that you do, or a student, or anything else that defines what you do. And the second one is the role of interests outside of sport. And where these two areas become really interrelated is that interests outside of sport will help with that identity not being solely built on sport, but interest outside of sport has other advantages for you and for your sporting performance, which we'll come on to later. Of all the topics that I cover within the work that I do, identity and interests outside of sport are definitely two of the more interesting ones for me, and I could talk for a week about these two topics. I'm not going to do that, obviously, but just to let you know that we will only be touching the surface of them during this session, but hopefully get to a point where you see the value of an identity that isn't built on sport, and also the interests outside of sport, and to get you thinking about how you can incorporate that knowledge into your life. Okay. So now it's time for the first task. So on a blank sheet of paper, I'd like you to do a spider diagram of you and your identity. So you're just maybe going to put a sketch of yourself or just your name in the center of the sheet of paper, and then add any words or phrases that describe you and your identity. So you can include things like what you're like, what you like, and what you'd like to be, maybe. Anything really that you would use to describe yourself or that somebody else might describe you. There are no wrong answers with this, and funny enough, contradictions are allowed. It might be a good idea for you to pause the video at this point for 2 or 3 minutes, or as long as it takes for you to put all your thoughts down on a sheet of paper. So you should ideally be able to cover a A4 sheet of paper with some words and phrases about yourself. Okay, so hopefully you've given yourself some time to do that. This is just a spider diagram that I did of myself and some of the things that I'm interested in, that I do, hobbies I have, where I'm from, other things that I do, a bit about my personality and what that's like, and also some of my values because they're very important to me and my identity and sort of who I am. One key question to ask yourself when you've done your diagram is, if you were to cross out the athlete or sports person or sport element of your spider diagram, would you still be you? Would there still be enough of you there to recognize yourself? And I'm almost asking, is sport just part of what you do, or is it at the point where it's a fundamental part of who you are? And if you're unsure what the answer to this is, think back to the very height of lockdown when we couldn't really do any sport. Did you feel like a fundamental part of your identity was missing? Now, this is not the same as missing sport, because presumably most of us missed sport in a big way. But did you feel like a fundamentally different person without a solid feeling of identity? And I'd also like to note that a solid feeling of identity is not based on one thing. Identity cannot be summarized into an Instagram profile. And I don't know how many of you have tried to put together an Instagram or a Twitter profile and felt that, do you know what, that doesn't quite capture everything about me. And that's quite good, because you're not simply just an athlete or a sports person or a student or whatever it might be. Your identity is much more than that. So this task that we've just done is quite similar to the roles task that we did in workshop 1. And the purpose of that roles task then in that workshop was to look at what it is that you want to plan and balance in your life. So getting that idea of all the things that are going on in your life and finding time for them. But that task can also be used to explore your identity a little bit more. As I mentioned, identity can't be summarized in 280 characters. So a good way to explore your identity a little bit more is to talk through your word cloud or your spider diagram with somebody else and explain what each element means to you. And particularly when you come to elements of your personality, what role they fill in your life and when exactly you're like that. And the same with your values, what role your values play in your life, and expand it a little bit. And another way of doing that is a little bit of journaling where you're exploring strengths and values and personality traits and emotions and building on that picture of who you are and what your identity is. So just to reiterate, you want a solid feeling of identity, but that should not in any way be condensed to 1 or 2 words or a sentence or a phrase. I sometimes get groups that I work with to put together a collage of themselves and who they are, and then get them to explain it in front of the rest of the group. And sometimes we'll explore it a little bit further in one-to-one sessions. There's a few ways of doing this collage. So the first and most basic way is just getting lots of newspapers, magazines and brochures and leaflets and basically any old printed material and, any pictures that strike you or that represent you in any way, putting them together as a somewhat meaningful collage. You can do that similarly electronically with images from the internet. Or you could use a collection of your own photos. So this is just one that I put together with my own photos, included some of my hobbies, my family because they're important to me. Hopefully captured some elements of my personality in there as well, and then included some of my achievements. And I think because photography is something that I like to do as well, it was actually quite nice to use some of my own photos, and particularly photos of some of the places that I've been. These are a couple of other examples then of individuals that I work with, sort of took the brief and changed it up a little bit. So somebody put together a mood board where she got dictionary definitions of some of the things that she's interested in, and then did a dictionary definition of herself in the third person. And sometimes, writing about yourself in the third person might give you a little bit more freedom and help you focus a little bit more on who you really are without the the restrictions that talking or writing about yourself might bring. And then this is another example. Somebody that likes to sketch actually did a series of little drawings of things she enjoys doing and things that she's interested in. I think, unfortunately, there's some misconceptions within sport and about sport being the sole focus of some individuals. And unfortunately, sometimes sports people feel that this is the image that they need to portray, so that wanted more really focused, all or nothing type image, where the truth is actually a little bit different from that. And this is just an example of a recent blog type article that Sam Bennett had done in the Irish Times, where he said that cycling is who I am. It got me out of the bedroom and out to meet great people. And he goes on to talk about, how sport can give people their identity. Yes, absolutely. Sport can help you, expose you to experiences and things that you might not have otherwise done, and that can help contribute to your identity. But sport should never be your identity. And I say sport, and I mean anything that you do should not be your identity. And just to give you, we've spoken a lot about identity, but I've not yet defined it. So just to give you a definition, identity, who you are, the way you think about yourself, the way you are viewed by the world, and the characteristics that define you. And note that there's nothing in there about, your identity being what you do. So it's a lot more than that. Um, and thankfully, there's a lot of great examples that sort of remind us that this 24/7 athlete sports person is not really the norm, or even the desirable. And we think, if we think about that 24/7 athlete, would you ever tell a parent that they can only be a 24/7 parent, or a doctor or a teacher, that what they do is all that they can do? And I don't think you would. And I mean, even a student, you wouldn't define them as, just going to the library and studying and going to lectures and just being a student. You know, you're more than that. So I think we need to move away from that 24/7 concept, and that, yes, being a full-time athlete or being a professional athlete might be desirable for you, but actually that doesn't and shouldn't limit other possibilities, and it shouldn't be your identity. Okay, so just to give you then, I said I'd give you some examples. So just to give you some Irish-based examples of individuals that do more than just their sport. So Mark English recently broke the Irish indoor 800-meter record and competed at the European Indoor Athletics Championships, having spent the last year completing his intern year as a medical doctor. I think the 2016 Rio Olympics was probably our greatest example of Irish athletes doing things and having careers outside of sport. And if we just run down through the athletics team, for example, that'll give you some flavor of of just how widespread actually these interests and careers and pursuits outside of sport are. So both Sarah Tracy, a finalist in the steeplechase, and Paul Pollock, who ran in the marathon, are qualified doctors. And then also Mark English at the time was a medical student. Lizzie Lee and Breach Connolly, both who ran the marathon, have full-time jobs. And Lizzie already had one of her three daughters prior to the Olympics. Kevin Seward, also a marathon participant, is a PE teacher and deputy head. Michelle Finn returned straight to UL to do the final year of her PE teaching degree. Ciara McGeehan and Ciara Everard are both physio graduates. Thomas Barr, who finished fourth in the 400-meter hurdles, has a master's degree and likes to drive fast cars in his spare time. These are all athletes who've not only found some time to do something other than sport in their lives, but have probably used those interests to help with their sporting performance. And then there are many examples outside of athletics. And for example, some of our rugby players were working in healthcare during the pandemic. Others give back to society in other ways. And a range of sports people have a range of interesting hobbies and businesses and careers outside of sport. Not to mention the numerous sports people that combine their sport at a very high level with parenthood. Then there's Marcus Rashford, obviously not an Irish example, but a very high profile example of somebody using their sporting platform to not just, perform at a high level and achieve it in sport, but also to work for, social justice. And I mean, I think he's received a lot of publicity for what he's been doing off the field recently, and rightly so. And yes, there will be people when he has a bad performance say that he's distracted by all that stuff that's going on outside his sport, his football, but actually when he's actually probably performing better on average, and where are those people when he's an outstanding performance? So I think it's very easy to pick up on that, and then people will say, oh, sports people, they should leave the politics to the politicians. But would you actually say that to anyone else in society? So why do we say it to sports people? Okay, so I'd like to get you now to just write down a few thoughts on what some of the benefits of doing things away from sport might be. So having interests outside of sport, what are the benefits for your life and your sporting performance? And again, if you'd like to pause the video for a minute or two while you just jot down some ideas. Okay, just to go down through some of the ideas that I've written down, and I mean this is never an ever growing list. So the first one is a physical and psychological break. So they say that a change is as good as a rest, and I think this is really true in sporting performance. Um, and sometimes, I mean, if you're a full-time athlete and you're doing nothing all day between your morning session and your evening session, then actually can that doing nothing actually make you feel more tired because you're overthinking things and you start to feel a bit lethargic. So, just having something, an interest away from sport can help with that. Something which we overlook when we overthink this a little bit is that doing something, particularly having a job outside of sport, can actually be a source of income and potentially help increase the longevity of your sporting career, because you don't necessarily need to give up because you're absolutely broke and you can't do this any longer, and now it's time to live in the real world and to have a proper job. A massive one is that having interests and a career or education outside of sport can help with what you're going to do when your sporting career finishes. But having those interests and the identity outside of sport can also help you transition better from sport to life after sport, simply because you don't have that same loss of identity when your sporting identity is pulled from under you, almost, particularly if you retire through injury or other reason beyond your control. Confidence gained from outside sport can actually help increase with sports confidence. So if you're doing well in other areas of your life and generally feeling good about yourself, then you're going to bring that onto the track or onto the sports field or wherever it is that you're performing. The routine that you have to do more than sport can actually help with your training and performance, and other things like adaptability and thinking skills that you're gaining from other pursuits in your life can help with your sporting performance. Having other interests help us have that broader identity, but also have a support network and a friendship group outside of sport, which could, for some, could be really, really helpful, and that you're not thinking and talking and comparing sort of sports performance and training and how you're feeling and what your next race is, and sort of over talking and over analyzing every aspect of your sporting life. And I mean, some sports people would have most of their friendship group from outside of sport and really benefit from that. I think having those interests makes you better able to cope with injury and lockdown and any other sort of enforced break from the sport. Yes, you still miss it, but life is still worth living almost. Having those interests as well help you to to keep your competitiveness and your focus for when that's most important. So for your actual competitions, rather than being over focused on every single training session and then not specifically having that focus or motivation or competitiveness when it comes to competition day. There is also a reduced pressure to perform if sport isn't the only thing that you do. And if you imagine you're going into a competition and if you win, you'll win some prize money. If that's your sole source of income, imagine the added pressure that, if I win this competition, I get to eat for the next 6 weeks. If I don't, I don't. And the additional pressure that brings. And then sort of another one, and sort of leading on from that, is that added pressure or susceptibility to engage in doping behaviors. So if you imagine that everything is based on your results, how there might be some added pressure to dope or to engage in cheating of some form because of that. Having a variety of interests and a wider support network and a wider friendship group can also help with mental well-being, and having that variety in your life and a way to relax and opportunity to give back and to connect with other people can all contribute to good mental well-being. Those interests you have outside of sport can be a source of joy. So, for example, if you imagine, and I'm going to use the example of parenthood, not because I sort of recommend it if that's not the stage of life that you're at, but just because it's such a good, strong, relatable example. And a lot of athletes who've become a mother, for example, talk about having this extra something to compete for, but also taking away that little bit of pressure. They're still a valuable human being, irrespective of whether they win or lose. And that sort of helps with that nothing to lose type attitude, which can really help with sporting performance. And there's a great picture of Lizzie Lee, one of the Irish athletes, when she was returning, I believe, from the 2015 um, European Cross Country Championships, and she's greeted in the airport by her young daughter, and such a wonderful photo of sort of that joy that life brings. And if you imagine sort of that, how much that additional joy can bring to your sporting performance. I think as well, these interests and these other things that you do outside of sport can really help to keep you grounded. And if you imagine you're mixing with people that are not sports people, and almost living this normal life will really help with keeping you grounded, keeping your feet on the ground, sort of thing. And again, I remember seeing um, a video of one of the O'Donovan brothers shortly after the Rio Olympics when he was back at college in UCD. And I think there's probably no better way to sort of bring you back to earth than having to do lectures and just be one of just be a normal person for a while after winning an Olympic medal. I think, and sort of building on from that, having this connection outside of sport can help keep sport in perspective. And yes, sport is important and sport is great and sport is a big part of our lives, but actually in the grand scheme of things, it is just sport. And sometimes remembering that can be really, really helpful. And I think for me, most importantly, particularly because I know that a lot of you guys haven't quite made it yet. Some of you will, some of you won't. Some of you will give up on sport before before your time is up, just because you feel that you're missing out or sacrificing too much, or can't quite give all that you think you need to give to sport. And I think having these other interests and keeping them throughout your sporting career can help you feel that you're not missing out because of your sport. And I think that's important. Okay, so we've spoken about why an identity outside of sport is important and why these interests outside of sport are important. But how do you go about building that knowledge into your sporting performance and your life, basically? So I'm going to share with you some ideas and some thoughts around that. It is just a starting point, and this is where how you implement this is very different for different individuals. It's very, very, very individualized. So just bear with me while I sort of help you to start thinking about how you might go about doing this. And to do that, I want you to think about a couple of words. So the first word I'd like you to think about is the word focus. So I want you to take a minute to think about what the word focus means to you. What does being focused look and feel like? So just take a minute to think about that. And the second word then is the word passion. So again, I'd like you to just think about the word passion and think about how that word makes you feel. And what does being passionate about something look and feel like? So again, take a moment. Okay, and I'm going to leave the word passion up there for a while. And there's a reason behind this. So if I walk into a group of young athletes and get them to write down the things that they think they need to be successful in sport, guaranteed one of them or more than one of them will come up with the word focus. And if I ask them to describe to me what the word focus really means, what does that mean they need to do? What are the practical implications of being focused? They don't really have any answers other than putting on a serious face and sort of thinking about what they need to cut out of their life so that they can be more focused on their sport. And my question is, can the words passion, can being passionate about your sport give you just enough focus, so the right amount of focus that you need without the seriousness and pressure that a focus on focus brings? I think passion, and hopefully these are some of the things that you came up with when you were thinking about it. Passion is exciting. Passion breeds opportunities. Passion doesn't limit things. Yes, it brings a certain element of focus because you're passionate about something or some things. But my other question is, can passion for one thing and the energy that that breeds, can that help with other pursuits as well? So can, for example, studying for a degree in a subject that you're passionate about, can the energy that that generates actually help you with your other passions like sport? Can passionate conversations about life or politics with your friends help and be brought to, you know, some of the more difficult things that you're doing within sport, those difficult training days? So I'd really like if you take just one thing away from this session, just to think about how you can take the focus off focus and put some effort and focus into being passionate and seeing where that leads in terms of opportunities and, you know, having more than just one thing to put your energy into. I think something else that's really helpful is we need to stop viewing these interests and pursuits and education outside of sport as a backup plan or a plan B. Because then I think you'll only come to resent it, because who wants to admit that, you know, they want to have another career just in case sport doesn't work out? I mean, who wants to think in that negative way? But more so thinking, why limit it ourselves? And I think Eliud Kipchoge talks about his phrase or motto is no human is limited. But actually, like, there is no limit to how many things we can pursue. And something that then leads into, then when I talk to athletes, individuals about, you know, their interests outside of sport, and they sort of think, but I don't have time for that. And there's this misconception that, you know, these interests or these hobbies that you have outside of sport need to take up as much time and energy as as sport. No, they don't. So something that can really help you might only take up an hour a day, or a day a week, or a week a year, or something. It can just be a small thing that gives you another aspect of you and who you are. And you get to do this thing, so therefore you don't feel like you're missing out from it. And I think we really need to start to see all the aspects of our life working together rather than against each other. It's not like being a student and being an athlete and those constantly jarring against each other. You're a person that happens to be studying and happens to do sport and maybe even have a part-time job, and that's all part of you and who you are, and those things can help each other rather than work against each other. I mean, something to remember, that you can have all these different aspects of your life, but they don't all have to be in focus at one time. So different things can take up a different amounts of time at different times of the year and different stages of your career. And sometimes that can be the difficult thing. How do you know when, right, now is a key time for sport, or now is a key time for study, or now's a time to earn some money, and sort of thinking about that and putting it in perspective of your whole life. And I think that the difficulty there is, seizing the opportunities and almost making hay while sun shines, but also thinking about your life as a whole, and particularly your sporting career as more than just the next season. So I think then and I mean, some people say, I'd like to have an interest outside of sport. I'd like to have something to do in my considerable spare time. Where do I even start? So a couple of little things, and I think now's a good time to introduce, now that we're near the end of the workshop, introduce this concept of so much more than an athlete. And this is sort of a mission that I set up with some students, some student ambassadors that we have at University of East London, where I also do some work. And they sort of came up with this title because we wanted to promote the value of an identity and interests outside of sport, but also to recognize, even if sport is the only thing you do, that it's more than just training and competing. There's other things that you have to balance just from being a human being, like managing your money, and if you're lucky enough to earn money, paying your taxes, and um, eating and sleeping and cleaning and looking after yourself, and everything else that goes along with just living. So as part of the project, we post on our Instagram and our Twitter accounts. We post weekly tasks, which cover things like personal development and exploring identity and doing things for other people. So the things that we do don't always have to be for us, because doing things for other people still has a huge benefit for ourselves and for our well-being, and may lead to something else. And then also exploring different hobbies and interests. So they're posted once a week. So if you go on our accounts, they go back to this time last year. So there's hundreds of them on there at this stage. Also over recent weeks, we've been posting about the benefits of reading and writing as two great hobbies for athletes. I mean, you can read or write about anything. They're cheap, they're flexible, they can take up 10 minutes, they can take up a day, they can take up as much time as you have to spare. And I mean, for some people, actually, writing is a great flexible form of income as a full-time or semi full-time athlete. And then something else, and it's sort of related to the reading element, but people tell me I don't know what I'm interested in or what I might be interested in. I say to them, right, if you were to go into a bookshop in the days when we can go into a bookshop, if you go into a bookshop and I'm saying you're not going to the sports section, but you can go to any other section within the bookshop, where might you be attracted to? And if they're really struggling to mentally imagine that, then I challenge them to actually walk into a bookshop and explore it and look at, yes, if they come out with a book on a topic that isn't sports related, great. But even without purchasing a book, seeing where sort of within that broad range of things that there are books about, where they might be attracted to, and that might be a good starting point. And a similar one to that is, a magazine stand in a good bookshop or news agent, where you've got a variety of hobby type magazines. So we're not talking about glossy gossip magazines, but actually magazines about different things. What there might attract you, what might be a starting point to explore a little bit more. And I think, I mean, if you're at the point where you don't quite know what you're interested in and you would like to fill your time a little bit more, or have an interest that gives you that mental break from sport and or study or whatever else you do, I think just start somewhere, and see where it leads. Because I think, as we've discussed, the benefits far, far outweigh the costs. Um, so please, to be encouraged, and don't feel like you have to be a full-time focused, wanted more type athlete to succeed, because actually there's absolutely no evidence to support that. Okay, thank you for listening. And I do hope to see you at some of our upcoming um, athlete development project workshops, the details of which I'll put in the comments below.